You had one job, literally one job. My client had a big 1-day event that they had spent a significant amount of money on print, online, and TV ads. These ads all directed to this one landing page that our agency had developed for them. This one landing page had one job. It was supposed to tell the consumers about that one product and then use the one link on the page to redirect consumers to the purchase page specifically set up for them to purchase that product. If you haven't guessed, it didn't do that. That one link on that one page for that big and very expensive 1-day event did not link to that purchase page. I'd like you to be very creative right now and take a moment and think about where that possibly could have gone and the whole wide internet, where it could have gone. You know what? I'll tell you. I'll show you. Yeah, it was a cat playing a piano, people. As you can imagine, the company lost a ton of business from that client. Heads rolled and leadership demanded a response from the teams. But what you might not be considering is how much they had to pay to fix it. You see, poor quality creates a ripple effect that is felt throughout almost the entire organization. Quality and engineering, sure, but also product, customer experience, design, sales, marketing. The entire organization can, in fact, be impacted by one single bug. Hi, my name is Erika Chestnut. As the head of QA at a fast-growing tech company, I've taken my 20+ years of experience in technology and quality and developed solutions and trainings for founders, executives, and quality leaders to build quality into their business so that it's a natural extension of everyone's conversation. I've been building and leading quality departments for about 14 years now, but before that, I was leading development teams. I started my career as a developer. I was fully bought into development. QA wasn't even on my radar. In fact, it wasn't on anyone's radar at that company. It was a problem that started to surface in some pretty nasty ways. And those problems can translate to real dollars and cents. For example, in a recent study, System Sciences Institute at IBM, say that really fast, reported that on average, it costs 15 times more to fix an issue found in production versus the design phase. So in the case of the cat, if you take the average salary of each department, multiply it by the number of team members that provided support for the fix, then multiply that number by the number of hours those team members spent resolving the issue, and then finally add it all up together, that number skyrockets pretty quickly. But here's the real gut punch. According to IBM, it costs 6 times more to fix an issue during development versus the design phase. You haven't even gotten to production, and poor quality can cost you money. So even inside of your delivery cycle, you need to be thinking about how to improve quality. How do you infuse it? How do you make it a natural part of everyone's conversation? How do you create a culture of quality within your business? Because when you don't build quality in with those standards, processes, and policies, you are going to waste money. But going back to the cat, in that case, testing quality was an ad hoc discussion. It wasn't intentionally built in, but instead the founders were so focused on the finish line, getting the product released by any means necessary, they were doing the unscalable and subconscious things. I've worked with lots of startups where they had people with skin in the game, the founders themselves, people with high equity. They were taking the time to check everything that went out the door. I consistently saw that as founders, they would have their hands in everything that was being delivered, regardless of whether they were the ones delivering it. Rightfully so. Like, I'm not disputing that. It was their business on the line, their commitments, their relationships, their money. They were doing the things that were not scalable. Eric Ries talked about this in his book, The Lean Startup, the idea that early on in your business, you do things that are not scalable. You take the customer calls, you run customer feedback inquiries, you design, you develop, you test. In his book, Ries gives the example of the Airbnb founders who went out to get customer feedback as a way to validate their idea. This wasn't scalable, but it was a necessary step in their evolution. However, oftentimes, I've seen businesses look at process and think, here's an opportunity to be more lean. They think, we have this covered, especially with testing and quality. Quick sidebar, it's a trap. It's easy to fall into this mentality for sure. When you're a 10, 20, and 40 person company, you can have those turn to your neighbor conversations to solve big problems with very little fanfare. It's easy for everyone to be on the same page, have the same information. And if you aren't and don't, it's relatively easy, to surface that as quickly as possible. But as a company grows and moves from a startup to a scale up and beyond, you need to explicitly define touch points to ensure that standards are upheld and that expectations are met, i.e. audit proof. But you know what I've actually seen? Founders will leverage those turn to your neighbor conversations to integrate a culture of quality subconsciously. They rely on those non-scalable activities to ensure excellence in their delivery, but that will always break down. As a business scales, the subconscious culture of quality will break down. When your business begins to scale, you need the culture of quality to be so interwoven within your company culture that it scales as well. That requires you to be deliberate and take measured steps with quality early on. As a quality trainer and consultant, I see this time and time again, that businesses fail to be intentional about quality during the early stages of their growth. But to create a culture of quality, you must be intentional. The idea that a process can create consistency that drives continuity resulting in quality is not second nature. In fact, the 2021 State of Testing report indicates that a whopping 70% of test teams struggle to get involved earlier to provide more value. 66% of test teams find it difficult to work with the business to understand the product before development begins, and that's valuable. 61% of test teams struggle to even communicate the value of testing to the organization and management. And this is further validated by the Forbes Insight Culture of Quality. In this report, companies with world-class quality programs, companies that have stated that they believe their company's quality programs are amongst the strongest and most advanced in the world. Even these companies stated that only 57% of the organization understood their quality values. Only 66% consistently applied those values. And only 56% of middle management provide equally evident support for quality, which validates why we see more than half of test teams express significant challenges explaining the value of testing to the organization and management. Do you see yourself in these numbers? Think about your closest two competitors. 2 out of 3 of you will struggle the same way. But don't worry, at the end of my talk, I have a takeaway for you. We'll make sure that you are not 2 of the 3. These struggles, they map directly back to the lack of intention around the construct of quality within an organization. When you are not intentional, you will fail to set standards, processes, and policies that create the expectation and structure that produces quality. Businesses don't often recognize this. They don't recognize the value or the impact of process on quality. They struggle to see that when you have a process, you create consistency, resulting in continuity, which produces quality. I'm going to say that again. Businesses often don't recognize the value or impact of process on quality. They struggle to see that when you have a process, You create consistency, resulting in continuity, which produces quality. But without it, your teams don't have clearly defined touch points. Things slip through the cracks, and as lines of communication increase, they also break down. But here's what's going to trip you up, or trip some people up. We've been talking about this for scale ups, 20 plus orgs. This can happen for a 2-person company too. In fact, I recently consulted with a startup that had 2 co-founders. They had some concerns about their quality and wanted to help improve it. It's what I do. So they called me. Only one founder was able to attend the 2-hour discovery call. The other had a last-minute conflict. And I'm pointing this out because normally I want to take the call together. And here's why. You see, during the call, founder A tells me that they have a developer, but that they were having quality issues, and she was baffled, her words, as to why. Now, developers have their flaws, mind you, sure, but baffled seemed like a pretty strong sentiment. So I started to dig into the quality issues. She said that they were close to launch, but they were plagued by recurring issues. The developer would deliver, which would result in a few rounds of bug fixing before they moved on to the next feature to be delivered. The issue came in when the next feature was delivered, the bugs that were previously fixed resurfaced. I continued to dig in a little further and ask for examples of the types of bugs that were resurfacing. Turns out they were functional issues and seemed to be related to a misunderstanding of business requirements. But do you want to know the punchline of the story? The real funny part? The developer that the founder was referencing was the co-founder. The 2 co-founders were not aligned on the business requirements. And after further conversation, I learned that it wasn't so much of a misalignment as it was a misunderstanding or even forgetting conversations. You see, they didn't have a process or structure in their development cycle. They had the turn to your neighbor conversations and then went about their work. But when it was all said and done, they had 2 very different ideas of what was expected to be delivered. Conversations like, I thought you meant, or didn't we talk about, or I don't recall this. They thought it was sufficient to turn to your neighbor. They didn't think they needed a process defined for their delivery. After all, it was just the 2 of them. They didn't need to do things like build wireframes or document business requirements or workflows or understand personas of the application or create a common language around the application or understand how and when they resolve their bugs. They didn't build these touch points, process, or require documentation, policy to ensure that they would start and end on the same page. As a result, they went in circles, and it had delayed their final delivery by more than 3 months, though it likely cost them way more throughout the entire life of the business. So, just in case I haven't been 100% clear thus far, to build a culture of quality in your organization, to champion quality, you must be intentional. You need to define, develop, and drive a culture of quality from the beginning. You want to lay the foundation for a culture of quality by defining what that culture is. What are your core values? How do those core values define your standards? How do those standards drive your quality? When you are defining your culture of quality, your standards, you are also defining who is responsible for that standard. And if any of you are like my team would hear this and they would scream, everybody is responsible for quality. Yes, this is true. But then you outline what they are responsible for, because that will trip people up too. What they are responsible for to then uphold that standard. The idea here is to pull everybody into the conversation around quality and to show them the part that they are expected to play. That will drive your culture of quality. Everyone in your organization, large or small, has responsibilities, deliverables when defining, developing, and driving a culture of quality. When you set the standard for your culture of quality, you are defining, developing, and driving expectations, touch points, deliverables. But when you don't set a standard, a definition of quality to gain that common understanding, there will always be a struggle between innovation and quality. The business will always have to balance creating new features against things like resolving production defects. Without a standard of quality, these become subjective decisions that can lead to an inconsistent level of quality across the application, across your business. A very common indicator of this that I see, massive bug backlogs. I've seen lots of teams be buried under the weight of defects, and it's even worse when those defects have a low functional impact, meaning they are likely cosmetic or have easily discoverable workarounds. But here's the thing, those defects by themselves, sure, not a big deal. It's not a big issue. However, in large groups, they create a death by a thousand cuts experience for your customer. At every turn, your customers are confronted with nitpicky issues. And when there are enough of these issues, they begin to lose confidence in the quality of the system overall. They question if there are larger problems that they can't see that could become an issue for them later. And companies that don't take the time to lay the proper foundation for quality will oftentimes bury their heads in the sand, hoping it will improve. In my career, I've worked for and with businesses that brought me in to fix the impacts of them burying their heads in the sand. There are companies that I've consulted, they're completely overwhelmed by the number of defects and the age of those defects. They have defects in their backlog that are 2 or 3 years old, but they don't want to close them because they want to address them. They should. They want to know where the bugs are. They want to know where the issues are. But there are so many combined with the fact that they don't have a system to prioritize or standards to be accountable to that they are paralyzed by the magnitude of the effort to clear them. Having a clearly defined standard of quality ensures that the organization as a whole understands the level of quality that they are expected to uphold. According to Forbes Insights, 35% of companies report that they struggle to adapt quality programs because of lack of uniform quality standards. And this doesn't just impact your customers. Without those standards, those expectations, your employees, or even just you and your co-founder, will run in circles. You will lose time and waste money. In fact, a study conducted by Gartner concluded that a company with a highly developed culture of quality spends on average $350 million less annually fixing mistakes than a company with a poorly developed culture of quality. These mistakes are not relegated to customer-facing issues. Your standards will define the level of quality you want to attain throughout your organization. You will then develop processes to uphold those standards. Your processes are going to help develop a culture of quality because they will empower others to lead quality for themselves. Your processes will clearly outline those touch points, those deliverables, those expectations to uphold your clearly defined standards. And because everyone is aligned on the level of quality that the business expects to attain, they understand the why for the process. A clearly defined why is going to be extremely important. Because when you are developing a culture of quality, building those processes that will drive consistency can sometimes feel heavy-handed for business teams, especially in our lean, DevOps, agile focused world. Everything about the tech industry says go lean and go fast. And it is achievable, but there is a delicate balance to improving processes and not stifling the teams by being too heavy-handed with them. And you do this by building it in with those standards, processes, and policies so that it is a natural extension of everyone's conversation. Have you developed processes? Do those processes both support and are supported by your standards? Do you have a way to uphold them? You want to drive a culture of quality by building in those standards, processes, and policies to ensure that it matures with you. Those standards, processes, and most importantly, your policies are key ingredients to creating a consistent, results-driven team approach to quality. You want to drive policies to provide specific guidance and clarify expectations around upholding your standards. When I consult with companies, one of the first things I do is to help them define and roll out what's called a severity matrix and service level agreement policy. These policies outline things like functional impact or how disruptive an issue is based on the functionality impacted, the different levels of functional impacts, the commitment the business makes to resolving identified issues, and how that commitment aligns with their defined standards, their core values. These defined policies convey the standard of excellence that the business is committed to, and then provides an avenue to hold themselves accountable to it for their customers. This type of groundwork lays the foundation of quality within your business. As you grow, you have standards in place that your processes are developed to uphold, that drive your policies to then maintain your culture of quality. Without this groundwork, you risk being in a situation where your company has grown, but your quality standards are ad hoc or subconscious, and you now have a test team that is expected to carry the burden of defining, developing, and driving a culture of quality by themselves. This will not scale, and your test team will revolt. Case in point, several years ago, I went in for an interview, and for the most part, it was your standard interview until I met with the test team. They were oversourced and undervalued, and the entire 45 minutes that they were supposed to be interviewing me was spent with them raising their grievances and me coaching them on how they could improve it. I mean, this could have been a very good interview strategy, but they walked away with some ideas on what they could do. The thing is, though, that the company, they waited to build in quality. They relied on a subconscious culture of quality that eventually broke down. Are you waiting too? You must take intentional and measured steps to build a culture of quality, to champion quality. Don't let quality sit in waiting to test, waiting to write test automation, waiting to write acceptance criteria, waiting to review stories, waiting to be defined. Instead, you want to define, develop, and drive standards, processes, and policies that cultivate a culture of quality within your business. If you don't advocate for quality standards, processes, and policies, you are going to wind up someplace else. Because the reality, the cat didn't happen because the team didn't care about the delivery or even because they didn't have skin in the game. The cat happened because the business was built without quality standards, processes, or policies that would enable and empower everyone to infuse and lead quality within the organization. There was no intention put behind building a culture of quality. So before I go, I want to challenge you to take a look at how, or even if, you are defining, developing, and driving a culture of quality within your business. And then go to erikachestnut.com/UTC to get my free download of the 5 questions to ask to build a culture of quality. Quality standards, processes, and policies are at the core of who I am. Are you ready to make sure that they're at the core of your business too? Thank you.